1 minute now, sorry.
Special Planning Commission meeting Wednesday, October 14th, 2020 is called to order at 6 p.m. Roll call.
Kelly.
Here.
Savoli.
Here.
Schwackenwald.
Here.
McCall.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We're here tonight to continue discussing on rezoning. The floor is yours.
Alrighty. So, you received a number of things already. So hopefully tonight it'll make sense where we bring all of it together and give you a chance to comment on, weigh in on a proposed set of new districts. So first I wanted to just give an overview of what's gone on so far. So the tool analysis started a year ago or so, and it was prompted by the Cornerstone PUD site, and which brought to light the need for the city to update the commercial and mixed-use zoning classifications or zoning allowances in the zoning code, especially dealing with the commercial properties along. Well, it started out with along West 130th, and then Pearl Road as well. And so over the last few months, in order to create or discuss and create a set of zoning regulations that meet the city's needs, we dove in and did a deeper analysis of the actual parcels and the whole setting, really, the commercial setting that's primarily on the zoning map, starting where the concentration of commercial exists on site. So, and then in terms of thinking about the zoning, it's reflecting back on the Cornerstone analysis. The Cornerstone analysis included the range of activities that could be or should be tackled by the city related to upgrading and redeveloping, fostering redevelopment along the commercial corridors. The study goes into a lot of characteristics of the parcels, some of which is over and above what you need for zoning, but knowing that zoning is only one component of a redevelopment strategy. So things like trying to encourage businesses to invest in their properties and things like that. Those are public actions or incentives or prodding that the city can do. Having your economic development department be proactive, which is going on right now, but keeping all of that is part of a toolbox, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the zoning is a critical component of it, but it's not all of it. So the analysis that we did with the mapping, like I said, it goes a little bit more than what you need in terms of creating a zoning district, but it's helpful in understanding where the redevelopment priorities are, and then the characteristics of the land uses and the density of development along the corridor. So with that, I'll go through these maps rather quickly because, like I said, you can always do a deeper dive, and I've got all of the data to back this up. So if anybody is interested in having the numbers that go along with the maps, let me know. I can certainly distribute that. So again, here is a map of the corridor that's showing the bulk of the commercial area within the city. It's important to point out, though, that there are little bits of commercial scattered in other corners of the city. So That would be something to discuss too in terms of what do we do with those little fragment pieces and whether they stay in the existing portions. So that we can postpone that discussion for now. But in terms of the analysis that was done, Dan Meany had started this back in July or August and had provided you with a spreadsheet and a map that highlighted all of these. At that point, I think he was focusing on the commercial properties. And commercial, according to the county auditor's records, is multifamily and retail, restaurants, etc. It did not include the city's property, the recreation. It didn't include the churches, things like that. So in order to have a better understanding of the corridor, the data analysis does now incorporate everything that's highlighted with a blue outline. And then for the trying to understand how each of the blocks play a role and what's the characteristic of each block, the blocks are numbered. Now you'll notice that there are 2 and 3 that could be one block. St. John Bosco Church is a very large piece of property that I think creates a separation between what's going on to the east side, which is block 2, and what's happening to the west, the remainder of block 3. And a similar sort of large-scale, non-commercial entity with the word school, and that is acting in the same way as somewhat of a break along the commercial corridor. You could say the same for the Greenbrier Commons and all of the cities, the recreation over there and the library and all that. I've included in here for the acreage purposes and because in looking at the county's, the city's master plan that was done a few years ago. In the master plan, it did identify this area as a crossroads of Stump York and Pearl as the town center. And so when you think about what happens in a town center, recreation and cultural activities like the public library and the theater are key components of a mixed-use town center development. So that's the reason why the Greenbrier Commons is in the mix. And just in terms of understanding the number of parcels and the amount of acreage that's provided in the little follow-up box. As we go through, if anyone has a question for clarification, please feel free to stop me. In terms of the analysis, or what it means, then we can, I was thinking we would get into that after I get through the presentation. The next slide then focuses on, highlights the land use and showing how the land uses are distributed along the corridor. And this is interesting too in the sense that you do have some higher density residential. You have some apartments across the street. Those also are contributors to a vibrant mixed-use district. So the apartments that are down the street and up off of Stump, those are strategically placed, I guess you could say. They will help reinforce the town center concept that's suggested or recommended in the master plan. The other thing to notice as you look at the highlights, the parcels along the corridor, are the depth of the different parcels. So you can see everything between Rochelle Boulevard and Maplewood Road on the south side. Those are very shallow. They're about 150 feet deep, 150, 180 feet deep, and that's about the bare minimum in terms of what's a viable depth for commercial development. You have a little bit more diversity of depth on the north side of the street, but there are a number of areas along the south, like I said, that are smaller parcels. And then when you look at the size of parcels along the corridor, and you see, you know, they're relatively, the majority of them, 76% of them are relatively small, 1.25 acres or smaller. And I did want to point out too that when I talk about parcels and I'm counting the parcels and aggregating the size, I looked at the ownership and sales dates and that stuff. So like Walgreens across the street, Walgreens, according to the county auditor's record, sits on 5 separate parcels, which is, so it was a redevelopment site that whatever the buildings were before, they each of those parcels had a separate address. So when the building was built, the parcels were never consolidated. So if you just did a straight analysis of parcels based on what the, you know, a straight data dump, you wouldn't get a clear picture for parcels like that. So what I've done in aggregating the data, did look for parcels that had similar or the same ownership, and and again, if anyone needs any of that information, you can't tell on any of these maps which ones are combined, but I can, you know, there are. So can you see my little? That's such a great pointer, but so right in here, also right to the east of the St. John Church, you have some consolidated parcels. So it occurs along the corridor. But so anyways, in terms of multifamily parcels, you see that we have there aren't a whole lot of them from a number of projects, but they do create a sizable land mass when you look at the acreage. There's just under 20 acres of vacant land, and that includes the pink, you know, the cornerstone parcels. So the bulk of those that 20 acres is those 2 parcels, and then the rest is a little bit scattered here and there. Again, across the street, so that you have a paved lot. I looked on the aerial photos. It's been down for at least 20 years. You know that. But you have that, so that shows up as a vacant parcel. It's got some pavement on it, but that's it. And then you do have, like I mentioned, you have these 2 very large religious facilities, which in a way, in my opinion, in a way, they help make the case that if you were to encourage more redevelopment with multifamily or with some sort of residential within this area between, say, Maplewood and Rochelle, if that were acceptable, and a developer were interested in doing that, I think that makes a lot of sense because of those land uses, because those churches are there, and you do have some multifamily. One other clarification too on the multifamily, the 2 convalescent homes, nursing home, assisted living, those are both shown as multifamily. So as the table notes, those 2 that are on the southwest corner of Rochelle. All right. And also, too, as I mentioned, the city's portion, almost 30 acres of land, is shown in green. That's also a considerable amount, and right within the vicinity of the town center area recommended in that master plan. We also looked at, gathered information and looked at the year built. And this is a factor in terms of identifying sites that are prime for redevelopment, because industry standard is commercial buildings are expected to have a useful life of around 40 years. And that, useful life in the sense that the construction cost, the use of the building has pretty much been maximized. And at that point then, in terms of looking at doing a redevelopment study, the 40 years is a typical cutoff point. So anything that's yellow, orange, or red showing up on the map is more than the 40 years old. Now, again, to clarify, the church is in here, and some of the city buildings are in here. The city buildings are shown as well, so you have to take that into consideration. But there are a number of buildings that are older than the 40 years. And then looking at the commercial structures and discerning and trying to show where there might be concentrations of vacancies, that's on the next map. And to qualify this, this was done in a generalized format, I should say. There were, the city's intern earlier this year had gone through, and he had made a list of all of the stores and had identified ones that were empty or occupied. But when you look at the shopping centers where there are multi-tenants, I did not go and dig up to see from a leasing agent or whatever how much square footage within that building is actually vacant. So it's a ballpark estimate in terms of the amount of space, the amount of floor area within a building that is vacant, and that's key also to keep in mind for the multi-tenant office buildings, because those are much harder to discern. You can't always tell from looking at the directory on the first floor how much space is vacant. So this is to give us a ballpark understanding of where there might be concentrations, and so the darker the color, the higher the percentage. And I point that out because, in contrast, this map, the lighter the color, the lower the value per acre. And value per acre, and on the next one, value per square foot, building square foot. These are two metrics that are reviewed, looked at to, again, see what the existing values are along the corridor and equalize to on a per acre basis so that we can compare big sites against little sites. We also have information on, I think there were about 18 properties that sold over the last 5 or 6 years, and some of them that had buildings on them sold for over $1 million an acre. So when we start looking then at ones and identifying sites that are at the lower end, so the lower end is $400,000 an acre, it wouldn't be a surprise to see that the two bigger sites that were the Cornerstone project, those are both highlighted as under the 400,000, which is not uncommon or not surprising for vacant properties. But the majority of the other properties are, they have buildings on them. And so there, you can see there is quite a wide range up to $3 million an acre, which, and you tend to not realize that, because when it's a smaller, like a half-acre lot, and it's going for a lot of money, you don't always equalize that to on a per acre basis. but again, this is a metric that helps identify, quote, at a glance, where redevelopment might make sense. So properties that have a lower value per acre, if there were a developer interested in doing some sort of redevelopment, he's going to want to maximize the project. It's to his advantage to find properties that are lower valued. On the next slide, we look at the value per square footage. So this map is identifying or color coding properties that have buildings on them, and then looking at taking the total square footage of the building and dividing it by the total value of the property. So that's both building and land values, and then showing, again, the lighter colors are the ones that are at the lower end of the spectrum. So you can see, again, see the variety there. And let's see, okay, and then on the next slide, this is for reference, primarily showing how the existing land within the study area is currently zoned. And one of the things that we noticed early on were these little pink fragments along the edges of, in various spots along the corridor, which is actually, that's probably community parking, I think, or commercial parking. I had first interpreted that as a single-family cluster, but it is probably the commercial parking. So that does make sense. So the zoning code right now, that's a specific district where all that's permitted is parking. So it's not that is a common technique where in order to accommodate commercial needs on smaller parcels and shallow commercial properties, to allow for parking to the use of the lot to expand into the residential district only for commercial parking. So that is a common technique. The other thing that is interesting, looking at the zoning map, is the city has a development district that's this darker blue. That's where the Big Lots is. And what's interesting about that is that was the city's first method for doing a larger scale commercial development and setting out the rules for development plan review. So, and that's the kind of thing that we would want to include and expand the use of the review of site plans or development plans, so that the Planning Commission does get the chance to, and when we go and look at the draft code text, that's what's going to give you the ability to review and ensure that any design guidelines, any of these landscaping requirements, things like that, circulation, that the proposed development is designed in a way that complies with the code. And the last map here is highlighting some of the things I've already underscored or stressed in terms of the town center area, which was again shown in the comprehensive plan, and then the residential and the Greenbrier Commons next to it. And so in thinking of other assets that are adjacent to the commercial corridor, thinking about Big Creek and the whole Parkway area, that efforts should be made in any sort of redevelopment to create connections to the Parkway, And then likewise, when we look along West 130th, to also create connections and have some association with Southland that's directly across the street. In looking at the type of land uses and the type of lots, the characteristics of the lots, and reflecting on the master plan had identified West 130th as an area for, it says light industrial, for the purpose of creating jobs, attracting new development that will provide high-paying jobs. So so in the map here, in this concept map, West 130th then would be somewhat different from the town center in terms of what kind of uses would make sense to permit and encourage. We can also talk about, if there's a need or does it make sense to create different design standards, so setbacks and height of buildings and things like that. I have another graphic that does a quick outline of some of the parameters. I think in terms of trying to be flexible so that you identify what's important, but then you give enough flexibility so that a developer or property owner can design a project that meets their needs as well. And then in between West 130th and the town center, I've labeled this area in between as neighborhood, for neighborhood scale type of a district, and again, primarily because of how the corridor is interrupted with the two religious facilities, the shallowness of the lots, things like that, and also because one of the goals with the town center and with the West 130th Gateway area is to try to encourage the type of development that's critical for creating that mass, that density of development, especially in the town center area. You want to try to encourage any new development to occur there, and try to get your concentration primarily of retail and restaurants. Those sorts of things, if you can funnel them to your two primary places where you want the density, that's going to help with the synergy that you try to create in terms of having concentrations of retail, entertainment, and things like that. So that's primarily the reason for this, quote, neighborhood area. And again, all of this is my recommendation, up for discussion. And then in terms of just an explanation of the residential / green space area along here, and thinking about how a town center district and even this West 130th Gateway area, in terms of mixed use is primarily having commercial development and the allowance for residential. So pretty much all of the area within that's in a reddish color, the draft code allows for some form of residential development. Knowing that there has been some interest in the former Cornerstone project, I went ahead and identified this as residential. So to the extent that it makes sense to go ahead and create and even perhaps rezone that area to a residential district. That is a reasonable option in terms of planning, land use planning for that portion of that western part of the city. And the green space is reflecting the land that the sewer district is interested in. Any questions on those maps? Okay.
I have on the last page where you have number 9 and 10. That's currently commercial, right? And you have it in pink.
9 and 10.
Yeah, on the last page.
Yeah. So the neighborhood district, use district, does allow for, in the draft code, does allow for various types of commercial.
Okay.
And you're right, 9 and 10, especially 10, we would want to review that because that's a strip center, that's a fairly large development. I think that fine-tuning the map will be something that we'll want to do in the sense of, should the line go here or move east or west or south? Definitely that sort of refinement is something that is expected as we go through the process. All right, then I wanted to go back then to my other handout that had examples in it. This is primarily to go through again, reiterate some of the things that the goals of both the comprehensive plan and the Pearl Road Complete and Green Streets TLCI plan. So on page 2, just to reiterate, the comprehensive plan or the master plan did include a number of recommendations for a redevelopment or encouraging a certain type of development along the Pearl Road, and it refers to creating a sense of place. And creating a sense of place is primarily having an environment that is memorable, that is comfortable and attractive, comfortable in the sense that there's trees, there's pedestrian amenities, things like that. A mix of commercial uses, and then also taking advantage of the city's location in the region, and I would say also to Big Creek Parkway, and then also to Southland Shopping Center, where you've got the end of the RTA's bus line. And so in terms of thinking about Pearl Road and West 130th, I think the master plan and the Complete and Green Streets plan are advocating, the goal is to implement the recommendations of those two documents. So that's what this draft code is trying to achieve. In terms of contemporary type of design principles, these next few slides highlight some of the things I've already mentioned, like in a mixed-use district, town center sort of district, the idea is to include housing. And the whole idea with including housing is that the more you have people right there to walk to the restaurant, walk to the store, whatever, so you start creating this ability to have people right there ready to, patronize the businesses. And then it's also, especially when you think about this area as the town center area, and thinking about the recreation amenities nearby, and so there are a lot of reasons why someone may choose to live in this vicinity. A couple of these other types of design principles: orienting buildings to the street so that as you drive along the street, having the buildings closer to the street and facing the street and not being obstructed with parking lots. I think that this was one concept we talked about back in August. And what that does is it helps, as you're driving along the corridor, it's a way to be more of an encouraging environment or attractive environment that lures people off of the street and into your development, into these developments. Creating inviting corners for pedestrians, this pretty much open space so that there is a reason for someone to walk to this environment, get out, or drive and get out and then walk if it's a pleasant and comfortable environment. And then about the uses, getting the mix right and getting the retail right, so having a good mix of uses so that encourages people to come and linger, so they're not just driving, getting out of the car, picking something up, and then leaving the district right away. Community spaces, we mentioned. Having the parking to the side or beside the buildings, it seems like a tricky thing to do, especially when you're already built out like this, but there are some design techniques to try to achieve that. And the reason that's important is if you're trying to create a walkable and enticing environment, if you're walking along the sidewalk, along Pearl Road, let's say, and between you and the building is the sea of parking. It's not an enticing, attractive, comfortable environment. So having the parking to the side and behind is a common technique. So then here's the map of the potential mixed-use districts again, and here trying to then identify the distinctions among these three districts. So Town Center and West 130th, talking about higher density, that's in relationship to the neighborhood area from a lower density, intensity environment. The distinction I see between Town Center and the West 130th Gateway area is this more of the emphasis on employment. So encouraging, fostering light industrial or research and development, that sort of thing. Offices would be permitted in both, but the idea with the light industrial is to encourage it more along West 130, or encourage it there, permit it there, and not in the Town Center area. 2 to 5 stories in the Town Center area. There are communities that have a mandatory minimum or a minimum height or number of stories in the buildings in their mixed-use district. I can tell you that when the city of Cleveland adopted that a minimum of 2 stories along Euclid Avenue in the Midtown district, the economic development director at the time did not support that because she was getting developers who were wanting to do 1 story, and she thought it was hampering the development. But the idea with the 2 stories, you can achieve that also with a facade, making the front of the building taller. But what it's doing is it's trying to create more of an enclosed space when you have taller buildings, to give a more of an intimate environment, as opposed to a wide open space with a 1-story building like what's across the street. But then when you look at what's appropriate as you go along Pearl Road and in between the Town Center and West 130th, and you think about lower density along that strip, I know you do have some taller buildings, but for new construction, to restrict it to 1 to 2 stories, that's another way of encouraging more dense development in the Town Center area and West 130th area. Okay, so these are just some examples. I'm sure you all have had a chance to look at them, but so we'll go through these pretty quickly. But this is giving you some examples of how existing development can be, when a property owner is making investments into their property, how their investments could be designed to accommodate the types of regulations that are in the proposed districts. So here, this example is showing ways that you can encourage different, 3 or 4 different lots side by side that each have individual access drives to work together to get cross-access easements so that you reduce the number of access drives along the street and encourage the traffic to exit onto the side street. This allows you to create more green space, lawn area, and in this example, they actually showed where some of the buildings actually were modified to, they built additions onto the front of the buildings to move the building closer to the street and create more of that relationship with the street. This is a similar example in the sense of trying to work on consolidating access drives and using different types of building addition features, things like that, to improve the environment in that way, and more of the outward appearance of the buildings. This was an example of a shopping center. So if you think about across the street and in trying to encourage a more dense town center area, one of the strategies that is fairly common is to, especially when you think about many of the commercial areas, commercial projects or developments along the corridor, they have way more parking than they probably need. And a lot of zoning codes had minimum parking requirements that were excessive, and so cities were requiring more parking than was needed. But there is often more development that could be accommodated on, say, the shopping center's property across the street. And so ways of doing that would be, in this sort of manner, creating more smaller scale development within, so that you can create more of an environment like a main street. It's not going to replicate a main street, but you have the ability to create more of a walkable environment where somebody can drive here, park their car, and walk around. Or in this example, building residential on the edge so that you can increase the number of people that live within the walking distance. This is another example that is less aggressive, I guess you could say, but showing how you could do additional development just along the edges and then focusing or doing some sort of public open space within the parking lot. And then a couple of meetings ago, I had distributed some examples of what's called this missing middle housing. And so I just wanted to bring those back to your attention. So everything in this, what's highlighted in the dotted line, I think is appropriate for Pearl Road. Obviously, that's, it's a policy call for the city. But in looking at the type of development, 2 stories, residential, I think Pearl Road is suitable. I think this sort of development is suitable along Pearl Road if there were properties that were to be redeveloped and they were on the shallower side. Okay, so those are my examples. Do you want me to go through and give you a highlight of the zoning districts that are outlined?
I mean, before you do that, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to state that, many of the people that are sitting here have lived in this city, for 30 years, if not their lifetime, and, this is great, and I think that if you look back at Walgreens, I remember it was a 2-story building that had offices in it, and it was torn down, and that was built, and that's been a very staple business for us there. And then if you also look across the street, that the Sunoco, was there where Dunkin' Donuts is. And, when they started tearing that apart, and they didn't take the entire building apart, they just shelled it. And I'm like, what are they going to do to recreate this into a modern, type building? And to their credit, I don't know if there's any, back issues on building or anything like that, but aesthetically, they did a very nice job cleaning that corner up, because that was an old, Sunoco gas station that kind of had its day, and they came in and really revitalized that. So seeing some of these ideas, you really have to have that vision to know that, what you see today, even this development across the street, it could be wrapped, right? And it could not only be wrapped, but it could wrap all the way from Walgreens and tie all the way in to the East Coast. So it's kind of energizing to see what you've done. It's just a matter of getting somebody that's willing to take that risk, right?
That's correct. And I would say, though, that having the right zoning in place is a big thing. Most developers are not going to pursue a site if it's not already properly zoned. Especially if you don't have the appropriate zoning district in your code to begin with.
Is that not a two-edged sword? So we go ahead and change the zone, and then somebody wants to come in with something.
You need to speak into the mic, they can't hear you. Which is unusual.
I know. So, hello. So my question is, if we start changing the zones in the different areas, are we not also inviting something that really we would not want in that area? So we change a residential zone to a commercial zone, or a commercial zone to a residential zone, and one person wants to put that there. What you're saying is that they won't be as inclined to go there. So we change across the street, we say, hey, we want to make that residential, and then all of a sudden we have a nice commercial that wants to come in, that property that would really do the city some good. There we are.
You're right.
Rezoned the wrong way.
You're right. There's always that chance that because nobody has a crystal ball, and we're making decisions now based on what we know today is possible, and things can always change. But I would say that in looking at the, see if I can get the zoning.
Would that fall into like a C?
A conditional use?
Right, a conditional use, so where it can be, where, I don't know if it's the building commissioner or planning or the BZA or council has that right to look at that conditionally and decide if that's a product or... That is why you would make some uses conditional and some uses permitted by right. So that's the benefit of having that category of a permitted use, and putting in place the review process. So there's no question, as I mentioned before, the current development district that's in the code has a plan review process in it. So we would want to have that same sort of plan review. And then the conditional use is, if you look at the mixed use district draft and looking on pages 2 and 3, there are a number of uses that I have identified as conditional. You don't have that. Yeah, you had this one.
It's just
right, and then I noticed that there was a lot of conditionals.
Yep.
On,
so
on
you're
that.
not doing that right now, so that would be
Right.
a whole new process that you would follow. And, there are some communities that want to be very hands-on in terms of having a say in whether a use can go here versus there. And so there are some communities that rely heavily on conditional uses, and then there are other communities that don't. So, it's all what your tolerance is in terms of what you expect and accept from new development. If you have rigorous design guidelines and you're more concerned with the form and it's not so much the use, then it's not necessary to have so many conditional uses. But if you're concerned about operational aspects and whether certain use is going to be consistent with and compatible with the main thrust of the purpose of the district, then that's when the conditional use makes sense. To your point, though, in terms of rezoning land from residential to commercial and vice versa, all three of these districts that are outlined in the draft, all of them are, quote, mixed-use districts. So they all have both residential and commercial types of uses permitted. So it's the range of uses in the neighborhood area along Pearl Road is more, there are fewer permitted uses there than there are in the town center area and West 130th. And it's primarily thinking about the area along in the, quote, neighborhood scale area as smaller lots and, again, trying to encourage the more retail, more restaurants to go into your primary activity set areas, core areas for development, West 130th and the town center.
Is it fair to say that making this mixed use makes the property more valuable when somebody goes to market it, so that they have the ability to say, yes, it's being used as X today, but in code, you can make it this, or this?
It gives developers or property owners much more flexibility. And so when you have a greater range of uses that your site can be used for, you have a wider range of potential buyers. So, for example, if you have, some communities have what's called like a green space or public use, and if you mandate property be used for, let's say, a golf course, if you have a recreation district, which I'm not advocating you do, and you don't have that, but there are some communities that do, that have zoned their existing golf courses as recreation district. Well, when that golf course goes out of business and that golf course owner wants to sell his property and all you can put on it is like, similar types of recreation, then your range of potential buyers narrows considerably. So to your point, yes, you have a lot more potential buyers if you have a wider range of permitted uses.
One more question. The change of use that we're looking at here, or mixed use, has there been a study done based on what we have in businesses today that would be negatively impacted based on the change of ordinance?
So one of the things, one of the fundamental aspects of zoning is it's not retroactive. So let's say if car sales were not permitted in the neighborhood district, and you have Liberty Ford down the street or whatever it's called now, and it's a car sales place, and it's no longer permitted by the new code, they would be, quote, grandfathered into, and so they would be able to remain, and that use would be able to remain on that site as long as it is not abandoned. So by Ohio law, you can't, cities can't require non-conforming uses to cease and desist, I guess you could say, or to go away. You have to, cities have to allow properties to remain in whatever use they have, even if you, quote, outlaw them. So you're not impacting any of the current users, and it doesn't, that non-conforming status doesn't stay, it's not restricted to the current owner. The current owner, if they wanted to sell their property, they could sell their property, and that property could continue to be used for that existing use.
As long as it was not completely closed down and vacated.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Now there are the city has the ability to create rules and regulations for what can happen on non-conforming properties. So if I have a non-conforming use, like the car sales place, and I become a non-conforming use, the zoning code could restrict whether that building could be expanded or that use could be expanded. Now, the idea typically is, or the assumption with changing the code to outlaw or no longer permit certain uses, is you're not permitting them any longer because you've decided, the city has decided that they're not desirable in that environment, in that particular district. So that's why then communities try to be restrictive in terms of you can't add on, and there are various, it's a spectrum in terms of how far you regulate them, but there are some communities that say you cannot add on to a non-conforming use a building that contains a non-conforming use, and you can't extend it across the rest of the property, that sort of thing. If it burns down or it's damaged more than X percent, typically 50%, some say 60-some percent, whatever, then you cannot rebuild. You have to reuse your property for a conforming use. So you have some latitude in how rigorous and restrictive you are with non-conforming uses.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So so I'm guessing you haven't had a chance to look through this draft. I can go through this and highlight things.
You have that one.
I have that one. I looked at this.
Okay, okay. Do you want to? I can either go through and give you like a overview of what each of these sections are, what they're intended to achieve, and then we can swing back and go through it in more detail.
Let's go through it a little,
Like that?
go
Okay.
through it.
Okay, so the first section, and I don't know, it's chapter 11 XX simply because there's not a decision yet as to where in the existing zoning code it goes. But the first section, 01, purpose statement, this is where all of the reasons why you're doing these, why the city is adopting these three types of districts, what's the reason for it. And having these purpose statements are helpful, they're useful for the Planning Commission, especially if, given the number of conditional uses there are, that whenever somebody proposes a certain type of use in a particular area, then looking at the purpose statements it would be one of the planning commission's criteria to review, you know, to see if the use in the particular use in the particular location is consistent with the purpose statements for each of the general purpose statements and then for each of the individual districts. So again, looking at the bottom of page 1 and onto page 2, then it's highlighting the distinctions between the 3 mixed-use districts. And just as a general comment, the terminology, I've worked with, or I've talked to some developers who have an expectation of, if they've worked in one community and the district is called, let's say, neighborhood mixed use, and they go to another community and it's called neighborhood mixed use, but somehow or other there's a lot of consistency. There is no consistency among communities in Ohio and probably throughout the United States in terms of labels. So the labeling, the name of the district, you know, can always be tweaked. So for our discussion today, I think it's to understand the concepts or get some agreement on the concepts of these 3 different districts, and we can always fine-tune the terminology, the names of the districts. Okay, so then moving on to permitted uses. So as we've talked, this table identifies uses that are, quote, permitted by right and conditionally permitted uses. And permitted by right means that if a use, a proposed use, meets all of the criteria, all the requirements in the zoning code, the city cannot stop them. They have the right to go in. The difference between that and, quote, conditional uses is that conditional uses are basically defined as a use that could be designed and developed in a way that makes it incompatible with the other uses permitted by right. And therefore, the city has decided that in order to ensure that that proposed conditional use is designed and developed in a way that is compatible, that the Planning Commission has the right to review it, and typically there are additional conditions, and the Planning Commission typically has the right to impose additional conditions to make sure that that proposed use on that proposed site, particular site, operates in a way that it remains compatible. So there's a lot of discretion that communities have when making uses conditional. But you have to remember, on the other side of the spectrum, is that it's hard to deny a proposed conditional use just because you don't like it. You know, so you have to when you're given the discretion to make these judgment calls, you have to have some criteria that you make your decisions to make sure it is compatible, but you have some rein on your discretion to make sure you're making decisions in a rational and reasonable and fair manner. So the key thing is that if let's say gas stations as an example, gas stations are typically listed as conditional uses because of their in and out traffic, and especially in like a town center area, they can be disruptive to what you're trying to, the activity you're trying to encourage on the site. But if the idea is that gas stations really aren't wanted, then it's better to just not even permit them in that district. Because you have to look at any use that's listed as a conditional use, is that it is likely to go in the district, but you have more control in making sure it's designed and developed in a way to make sure it is appropriate. Does that make sense?
Basically, what you're saying, if the gas station wants to move in to a residential, no, you have to go to our commercial district.
Right.
Where they are permitted.
Mhm.
So you basically can't keep out any business, they just have to go into the right district.
Right, yeah, yeah. However, right now, the way the commercial district is written, it's pretty open-ended. So it's very difficult to try to find a reason why a proposed commercial use is not, why to deny a commercial use into this district. Typically, the way zoning codes are written nowadays, it's you have to be, a particular use has to be identified on the permitted use table as being a use that's permitted. And if it's not on the table, if it's not listed as a permitted or conditional use in that particular district, or it's not found on the table at all, then it's not permitted. So there's a big, by identifying this list of uses, what you're doing is you're really narrowing the right for somebody to come in and say, well, you know, I'd like to do a truck terminal, and then because in the current code, let's say if somebody came in and wanted to put a truck terminal in a commercial district, it would be, I think you could make the case, but you don't have a whole lot of guidance on saying no to a truck terminal. Here, okay, no truck terminal on this list, so they're not permitted. And the other thing that's beneficial, it works both ways for the city and for developers or property owners or applicants, because like I mentioned earlier, most developers new development is looking for sites that are ready to go. That there's a long, let's say, to get approval of either say trying to amend your zoning code, trying to make changes to the list, is time consuming. And so developers will go elsewhere, especially in Cuyahoga County, where they might find a piece of land at the right price along Pearl Road, and if they see that what they want to do isn't on the list, then they can probably go 2 miles down the road and find another suitable site. So, in other words, you're giving a lot more direction and helping property owners and potential applicants know what's acceptable. And by having that spelled out more concretely, it makes the process more specific. There's a greater understanding of what the expectations are and the anticipation that they would get approved.
In this map, where you have drawn out town center and gateway and neighborhood, you said that this could be modified.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The only reason I asked that question and bring this up is two areas two lots that I see here that are in the neighborhood arena
Mm-hmm.
are basically pretty large establishments that are, I can't imagine it will ever be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at the one that's on Ackley and Pearl, the gas station, and then the other one is a commercial building that was renovated probably 10 years ago that's on Pearl and Parma Park. I think it's Parma Park. Is that Parma Park? What is red? What is that? That's Parma Park, right? Yeah. So those are in. But I'm looking here, and if I'm looking at neighborhood mixed use, that you can't have either one of those establishments. It's an N. It's on page 3. right?
So,
Vehicle services, mixed use, N.
vehicle-oriented type, yeah,
What's that?
car-oriented type uses. So there's different things you can do in the sense of trying to accommodate existing uses that that you want to and you believe are sufficient. So what we could do is, let's say, both of those, you know, if we knew how big the sites were. Are you talking about Liberty Ford next to?
No, talking across the street on the other side of the street. It's on the corner of,
What's
What's the name of the building?
Red Air.
Oh, Rad Air.
That is Parma Park.
Parma Park, right? Good old Parma Park. So I'm just thinking of that as you show that as all residential or neighborhood. And under neighborhood mixed use, if you go to page 3,
Right. Mm-hmm.
it says vehicle service, minor service, oil changes, N.
So one of the things we could do is if you think that use is appropriate along the corridor under in certain conditions or under certain conditions, then we could make it conditional use and do it in a way that it's limited to where it could go. I think.
And I understand your concept behind it is that if somebody sells it, it continues to stay that unless it goes dormant, and then it would have to be something else. But I'm looking at, these are pretty good sized lots. They're not, they're not smaller lots. And
Across the street too is the.
What's that?
Across the street is the import auto repair.
Right, exactly. So I'm just thrown off by the neighborhood, but I mean, I like the concept of the C or the P or, and I don't know if that's something that you could create could you create another, you have a PSC and then can you create an N1 where it's not allowed except for, or I don't know, I'm just.
Well, so what we could do is, so if we're looking at vehicle-related things, there could be a larger lot size requirement in the neighborhood district area, so that so it would make it conditional, first of all, and then as one of the conditions, have a minimum lot size. So
That's what I'm thinking, make it a C and then
Right.
have whatever conditions are to make sure that it's not gonna, you're not gonna get a one block, one small little building that's gonna have somebody with a one-car garage or whatever.
Right. So that's one option. Another option that some communities do is make anything that's existing, say a car wash in the neighborhood mixed-use district would be conditional, but only if it existed prior to 2020. So all of your existing businesses remain permitted, and they don't have that non-conforming status, which can be an issue in terms of trying to get finance. Some banks can see that as a negative aspect of a property. But so you could do either one of those two techniques to fine tune this and make sure that you're not harming your existing businesses.
He caught my attention first, Tony. Oh, Mr. Mayor, did you have something?
No, go right ahead, Anthony.
Question. By making it conditional, does it prevent an existing business from expanding?
No.
Okay.
No. There's a big difference to saying something is permitted as a conditional use under the right circumstances versus saying it's a non-conforming use and we don't want any more of these. And by saying it's non-conforming and removing that use from the district or not allowing it, the court's rule, or the way it's interpreted is the city doesn't want that use any longer. So it's a distinction of how the city is viewing that particular use type.
So there's nothing that would prevent an owner from expanding, like rather wasn't that size originally, and they successful. I'd like them to be able to continue to be
Yep.
successful.
Yeah, and the thing about it, making this change, so any existing use that is, any use that's there now, if the zoning code gets amended and you make it a, quote, conditional use, any change, any alterations that property owner makes to their site has to go through the conditional use process. So, according to whatever the rules are, So, yeah, you're not harming an existing use by making it conditional.
I really think it's important to just review that so that, again, like you said, if something's considered non-traditional any longer, just like anything else in life, when somebody goes to lend on it, they may have to get alternative financing, which could be detrimental to our business owners, and I just don't want that to happen. That's all.
Yeah, and one of the things, this really became an issue back in the late, 2009, 2010, after the housing crisis, because there were a number of communities that were expanding their commercial districts. And so they rezoned, let's say, if Parma Heights were to extend your commercial district going east along Pearl, past Ackerley, past the number 9 block, in the anticipation and expectation that more commercial would develop, and it didn't develop, and those residential homes were rezoned to commercial, and homes were no longer, homes became non-conforming. Business or banks refused to finance a new homeowner. So, like the city of Fairview Park ended up having to rezone back to residential areas along some of their main streets because they had made housing no longer a permitted use, and the banks were saying, we can't give you financing then.
Question over there, I think.
Correct. So my question is this, and I'm going to pick on the medical marijuana dispensary. So we say that it's conditional, and now it gets approved that we put one in here in the town center under mixed use, okay? So are we then saying that every medical marijuana facility then should be permitted?
No.
I mean, we could have, a whole line of them,
Right.
And
Yeah, and I think
so, I mean, that's my question is how...
you're picking out the really tricky
I'm
ones.
just picking out one. I mean, it could be a microbrewery, which I would disagree with.
Yeah. The thing about conditional uses is that because the Planning Commission would be weighing each and every application based on what the proposed development looks like, how big it is, where it is, what's surrounding it. You are not, by approving one, you are not then saying everybody else who comes after them in that same vicinity automatically is approved.
Okay, so part of the code would allow you to then still say, okay, we only want one in this area, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, that's where the conditions, each one of these uses that are listed as a conditional use, typically you have a set of other conditions specific to that use.
Okay.
That then the Planning Commission, the applicant would have to comply with, and then on top of all that, then the Planning Commission could even impose additional conditions. The medical marijuana one, based on our earlier conversations, I put in the town center and West 130th. I think that's one of the uses that would be up for discussion as to where it belongs, where's the right place. That and body art / tattoo parlors. The thing about the city's current ordinances is that there is a distance requirement, a separation requirement for the tattoo parlor, so 1,000 feet. The medical marijuana dispensary, right now there's not likely to be any of those because they're licensed by the state, and all the licenses have been distributed already. But who knows? Things can change. So it's always good to, when you're looking at these particular each of these particular uses, is to try to think of the worst case scenario in terms of what if, like you just pointed out, what if, and try to write regulations that can take that into consideration, or it's a factor for the planning commission to consider, so that. And then,
Mr. Chair, just a quick question for Chris.
Yes.
Chris, right above automotive uses, there's limited outdoor operations. What would be included under limited outdoor operations?
You're on page
On page 3,
3.
right above the highlighted automotive uses is limited outdoor operations. Conditional use in the 130th mixed use area.
So, yeah, that would have to be defined in greater detail. But one of the things is whether or not there is a place for outdoor storage or other types of outdoor activities. And if you were to allow outdoor activities, my expectation is that it's appropriate along West 130th, most appropriate there, and maybe not appropriate in the neighborhood area or the town center. So I would put an asterisk next to that, because typically when you are, to your point in terms of what does that mean, usually it's outdoor storage. So if somebody were to sell rental equipment, like Home Depot has some rental equipment that they store in their parking lot, what was cherry picker type things, big types of things, you could specifically identify outdoor storage associated with a permitted use as a conditionally permitted use.
We have those. Would that include tent sales,
So that's,
sidewalk sales?
yeah, those are more the seasonal, temporary type of things. So on page 4, there is under D and E. So D is getting even more specific in terms of clarifying the indoor, outdoor, and then E is the temporary, seasonal type sales. And the city already has rules for that. So so there's a general reference to that. If necessary, we could always refine that and be more specific as part of this district. Okay, and then moving on, so on page 4, this is an example of how it's possible, this use requirements for large parcel development, how it's possible to establish certain requirements based on different characteristics. So this particular requirement is basically saying if a property owner, a developer has a site that's say an acre and a half, at least an acre and a half, so across the street, if they were to redevelop across the street in the town center district, that because of the size of the lot, they would, according to the way it's written here, they would the applicant would be required to do a mix of uses. So the mix is a minimum of 2. So it's not too onerous, but a mix of retail, office, residential, etc. And it's not required that a mix of uses be in the same building, but if you have an acre and a half, then you could have 2 different buildings with 2 different uses, and you meet the mixed use requirement. So this is a policy decision that the city would weigh in on and decide whether this is if this works for Parma Heights, and then it gives you some additional design criteria for how it's supposed to be developed, with first floor retail or first floor display windows, but it also under 4 then does give you some flexibility on that too. Section 4, the development standards. So this is something that can be as defined as you would like, or can be wide open in the sense that you would review a development plan and see if it works, and review it for the cohesiveness of the development based on the development plan. The minimum lot area and minimum lot width are really only apply for any lot consolidation and re-subdivision, because the properties are already subdivided. But then the front yard is really the key thing in terms of front yard is measured by along the right of way. So what is the relationship? What is the required relationship of new buildings to the street? So typically it's closer to the street than what's currently required. So that's where the minimum and the maximum come in. So minimum of 5 feet. Now you may just think, oh, geez, that's really too close to have a building along the sidewalk along Pearl. Maybe 10, maybe 15. So somewhere in there, but allowing buildings closer to the street than what's currently permitted. Some communities, not all, adopt also a maximum setback, so that if Big Lots were to be developed today, or let's say, this were in place, Big Lots would not be able to have their building set so far back with all their parking in front. So this code would not allow that to happen. That they would have to have some sort of building closer to the street to create more of that environment along the street. So that's one of the biggest things that's in line with some of these illustrations that I showed, those redevelopment illustrations. All of those are trying to require new development closer to the street to create that more of a walkable environment. Any questions on that?
Yeah. So we bring everything forward so you're walkable, so all the parking goes in the back.
Right.
Where all the residents are.
Well, so for here across the street, it would be inside, within the development, because in a project like across the street, the goal is to have something closer to the street, and if you have your existing strip shopping center behind, that's okay, because so now it's more contained and not so visible from the street. So to your point, though, some of these shallow lots, then that could be a concern. However, I think that it's also common to include screening requirements and have a setback from residential districts, as shown on page 5, that whenever a commercial lot butts up against a residential lot, that there is a minimum the requirement either in more urban areas. It's hard to try to do buffering with spacing, so typically it's more fence with some trees to create a screen and a sound barrier buffer type thing.
Mr. Chairman, Chris, I think you said earlier that in regards to commercial properties, a lot of them are actually, to be more aesthetically pleasing, they're moving them up and they're parking on the sides as well, correct?
Side.
So you're not always saying that you have to park in the back. You just have to have enough square footage, either width-wise or depth-wise, to where if you put something up front, like here, this whole area right here would be more aesthetically pleasing if there were a wrapped building in the front, right? 2 or 3, right? And then either parking on the sides of them or behind it. And I get where the challenge is with residents in the smaller block areas, but I think that area is more the neighborhood area where there would be more restrictions in the neighborhood area than there would be in the town center, you know. At least that's how I see it.
It's definitely a challenge on the smaller, shallower lots.
Right. And that's why I always wanted to have parking on Pearl Road. But
On-street parking?
I'd like to have, on in front of the building parking on, like in a smaller. And I know that's a whole challenge in itself. So.
Let's see. And then on the next page, page 6, it's the height allowances. So I see there's there's an inconsistency. West 130th, 1 to 5 stories was on the map, 2 to 5. So that's where I think West 130th is less of a concern in terms of the height of the buildings that I would say in the town center area. And then parking requirements, what this section is doing is really giving the city more flexibility and giving an applicant, allowing an applicant to include less parking. The idea with this is that if you have your concentration of mix of uses with residential and retail, that the expectation is you'll have more people walking around and maybe not as many cars. But the other thing too is many communities have way more, their parking requirements require way more parking spaces than are necessary. So you could do, you can have something that's unique, that gives you some flexibility within these 3 mixed-use districts, or you could update and make changes to your parking regulations across the board. So in this example here, though, the expectation is that the maximum amount of parking that there would be within these 3 mixed-use districts, an allowance, a limitation on the number of parking spaces you could, a developer or applicant could include on their site. And that's that's a pretty typical contemporary type of a standard that more and more communities are doing, primarily for retail because of the notion that so many retail businesses provide expansive parking for 2 days out of the year, for the day after Thanksgiving and whatever day is the other day. Everyone else is people are shopping. And then there are other things you can do to create an environment that is conducive to biking by requiring some type of bicycle parking spaces, so many spaces, or just having some rules and regulations, design criteria about where bike parking can go. And then the last section, or section 9, includes a variety of design standards and principles. These are fairly standard types of things. This is where some communities create 3, 4, 5 pages of design requirements. The more you do something along these lines, the more you're then getting into very prescriptive, what's called form-based codes, where they're trying to really be very definitive on what new projects have to provide. So this is where you have a lot of latitude in terms of trying to fine-tune what it is you would like to see each of any new redevelopment project would undertake. And then on the last page, as I've mentioned before, there's a section in here referring to a development plan review process. So that a development plan review process and a conditional use review process would be something that would not be within this code. It would be adopted outside of this code, so that it would be applicable to other districts within the zoning code. Any more questions?
Mr. Pat, I don't mean to put you on the spot. What are your thoughts? And you can tell me you haven't taken it all in yet.
My opinion is the city is overdue for rezoning. A very good template. Adjustments, but I think it's well done.
Now, I know that the service department was looking at, changing some of the things about what requirements business owners had when they went to rebuild, and materials used, and our stuff was very outdated. It was done in the 50s, and you'd been working on that. Has any of that you were working on before able to transfer into this? And
well, some of it, there's other ordinances that we're going to be talking about updating, and we'll be bringing those forward too as well. We go along with this.
Are you talking about building materials?
Just,
colors?
we're talking about all of this, and then that was coming as well. Would be able to?
Yep.
There's different ordinances that we'll be bringing that'll fit with this, but some of them are old, outdated, just need to be amended instead of totally changed. There's amendments we could do to bring this up to a better standard.
One of the thoughts I had is to look at the entire zoning code, right? Especially trying to figure out where this would go in the current code, and thinking about how there are other ordinances, other parts of the zoning code, and maybe other parts of the ordinance that also should be looked at, to maybe sooner rather than later, think about a framework, an organization of what a new code would look like, so that, for example, if this were to, you would put a number in it, call it a certain chapter number based on what we're anticipating a new code would look like, and especially with, say, a whole chapter on conditional use review and development plan review, so that.
Talked about that today.
Oh, you already have one? You have an outline then?
No, we have a mental outline. We talked about conditional use and development standards based upon the information you gave us. We've kind of looked at some of that, done some preliminary research on primarily conditional use ordinances from some other local, municipalities. Nothing's been roughed out yet, and of course, when we get to that point, we want to consult with you first to see how this all melds together before we then roll it out to preliminary rollout to planning, so they can see how things are starting to come together.
Right. Yep.
I do have a question. From a timing standpoint, which comes first, the ordinance, the zoning, the plan? I mean, I don't want to do wrong steps.
The charter, the way we set this process up was, this is what we, administration, has portrayed to you as, in the council, as an informal process at this point, because you can see how long it's taking us to go through this, and we're getting closer to the end than we are to the beginning. But the charter says that once the council refers it off to planning, the planning commission has 60 days to review and then report back. We tried to avoid that simply not to delay, but because we knew this was going to be pretty onerous, based upon the fact that we haven't reviewed most of these codes in 50+ years. Now, there is a provision in the charter that allows the council to extend that time period by ordinance or resolution so that we don't get caught up in the 60 days. We don't really want to do that. We kind of like to keep moving this along. So, the goal was that we'd have this done a year ago, but then we had issues, and then COVID really has hampered how we've done a lot of things around here, as you can tell. It kind of changes the focus of public meetings. So what we would like to do is get the council now involved, maybe with the same type of presentation sooner than later, so they're kind of clued in on what you've looked at, and they can start to think about the same issues and maybe make suggestions to planning before there's a formal referral from council to planning. There's public hearings that are still involved, as we know. Council needs to read this at 3 readings, and whatever we do, it's got to come to planning, because we are amending zoning codes, and the charter, as you know, requires that we come to planning with that for your blessing and recommendation before it's referred back to council for their formal action. I hope I answered your question.
Almost.
But I would say that the zoning is what the moratorium is addressing. And the zoning, so you can't just adopt this. At the same time, you need the development plan review chapter and the conditional use chapter. But as
And ordinances that would need to be changed? I think that's where my question is.
Yeah.
At what stage is that? Is that after all of this, or is it at the same time or before? I mean, and that's where, and maybe...
Well, it could be, I guess it could all be done at the same time, because then everything would flow more efficiently. We've had some discussions about maybe some revisions that we could present to you prior to this being finalized, so that we have something in place when this actually is brought out, when it's formalized or approved. One thing we are very cognizant of is the moratorium. It was on for 6 months and extended. It's extended, I think, through February. We prefer not to go that far, because we know that there are developers or business owners or landlords who have potential business opportunities, and we don't want to stand in the way of those. But so we would like to move as quickly as possible, but be as comprehensive as possible so that we get it right.
I agree with that, Mike. I just want to make sure that we have everything that's going in the basket and don't come back and go, oh, we forgot about X.
We all agree.
Okay.
Yep.
I would weigh in on the difference between what we went through today, which is a lot of policy and a lot of decisions that you have to really fine-tune this to make it fit Parma Heights, versus a chapter on development plan review and conditional uses, which can be pretty boilerplate. So you're going to want to spend a lot more mental energy on this than what would be required for some of those other things. And to the extent that any of those other ordinances are not in the planning and zoning code, that you might not even have to go through, the city might not even have to go through the same process, might be even a shorter process.
That's right. And Ms. Hopkins is right. For instance, if you go to any city that has a conditional use ordinance, they're pretty similar. They're tweaked based upon individual city needs or requirements or thoughts. But, we could come up with something like that probably quicker than, as she says, what she just went through, because as you can tell, you've asked a lot of questions here tonight. They're very good questions, but as you just said, Chris, there's a lot of thought process to go into this to tweak it, to get it right.
Yep. And in the interest of time, there are some. You could even look at this. Not that I'm advocating it, but you could look at it as a two-step process where you're getting the guts. You adopt the guts of what you need to get in place, and then you could, for example, since you're not unless you've got a developer in the wings, you're not expecting wholesale redevelopment across the street. Where so if there is a lot more discussion on, say, the design standards and principles, that's something that could be, you could adopt something basic and then take 6 more months to fine-tune and expand upon your design principles, and then just make an amendment a year from now that's adding those additional design principles. So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways I think you could make it happen. Whatever you need to happen fast, make it happen, and then for additional stuff.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Mayor?
No, no questions. I just, after this discussion, see how thoroughly the planning reviewed and the great presentation from Ms. Hopkins. I think what I'm going to do is touch base with our council president. I'd like to get a presentation to council as quickly as possible, Chris, so that we've got council reviewing it as well as the planning commission. I'm sure there's going to be some tweaks. We're fortunate that Councilman Stavoli sits on both bodies, so that'll be of assistance. But I'd like to check with you after the meeting, Chris, see what you're available as soon as of next week to get this to council for their review.
Mr. Chairman, do we need to refer to council so that they can start that process, or?
No, you're not. No, we're still in the informal process
Okay.
right now. So
Okay.
we're just trying. I think what the mayor is suggesting is we get council caught up to where you're at, so that they're fully informed when you do then send back maybe some of your recommendations. They can tweak them before they formally send it back to you for that formal process, which would be expedited because most of the work is going to have been done. So we want to get everybody on the same page at this point.
And it's not uncommon when going through, when a community goes through a major update in something substantial like this, to even have a combined work session so that planning commission and council members are in the same room. Obviously, that was probably applicable a year ago, maybe not so much now.
It's a little challenging.
A little challenging, yeah.
Well, we'd admit it'd be a lot more efficient if we had council here tonight to hear this presentation instead of bringing you back next week to essentially do the same thing, but we've been living by the 10-person in a room rule. It's very strictly adhered to here, so that's a hindrance at this point.
Okay, if there's no further business, I move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Kelly,
Yes.
Savoli,
Yes.
Walkenwald,
Yes.
McCall.
Yes.
The Special Planning Commission meeting on Wednesday, October 14th, 2020 is adjourned at 7:55 p.m.
Chopkins, thank you for all the detail. Really appreciate it.
That other one you had